They threw me out in the rain. Not metaphorically. Not in the way people say it when they mean they were asked to leave politely. I mean, my son opened the front door of the house I had paid for, looked me in the eye and said, "You're embarrassing me, Dad. Just go." And then he closed it. And I stood there on the porch in my good shoes, in November, while the rain came down and I could hear them all laughing inside. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. I am not a man who cries easily. I spent 31 years building something from nothing. And in that time, I buried a wife, raised a son alone, and learned to keep my face still when things hurt. But standing on that porch, 63 years old, soaking wet, listening to my son laugh at something his father-in-law said inside that house, I cried. Not because I was cold, because I finally understood what I had built, and who I had built it for, and how badly I had miscalculated. But that was November. By February, everything had changed. Let me go back to the beginning, because the beginning matters. My wife, Carol, passed when our son was 11. Pancreatic cancer. She was gone in 4 months from diagnosis to funeral, and I have never in my life moved so fast to stand still. The world kept turning, and I kept showing up to his school plays, to his baseball games, to the parent-teacher conferences where I sat alone in a small chair, and nodded at things his teacher said and drove home afterward, and sat in the driveway for 20 minutes before I could go inside. His name is my son, and I loved him in the way that men who have lost everything love the one thing they have left completely, quietly, without condition. I owned a logistics company, nothing glamorous. Freight coordination, warehouse contracts, regional trucking routes. I had started it in a rented office with one desk and a telephone, and over 30 years it had grown into something substantial. 12 offices across 7 states, a staff of over 200, contracts with manufacturers and retailers that I had cultivated personally, one handshake at a time. I was not famous. I did not appear in magazines. The people who knew what I had built were the people inside the industry, and I preferred it that way. I drove a used pickup truck. I lived in the same house I had lived in for 22 years, in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio. My clothes came from department stores. I ate lunch at a diner 2 blocks from my office most days, and the woman behind the counter called me by my first name and knew I took my coffee black. My son believed I was comfortable. He knew I owned the company. He did not know what the company was worth. I had never told him, not because I was hiding it exactly, but because Carol and I had agreed early on that money talked too loudly in families, and we had wanted to raise a boy who understood the value of things before he understood the price of things. After Carol died, I had simply continued. I paid for his college without discussion. I helped him with his first apartment. When he told me he wanted to propose to a woman he had been dating for 14 months, I gave him his grandmother's ring and said, "I thought it was a fine idea. Her name is my daughter-in-law, and her parents are the Hargroves." The Hargroves are the kind of people who announce themselves before they arrive. Her father had made money in commercial real estate in the 1990s and had been coasting on the reputation ever since. Her mother collected charity board positions the way other women collected shoes. They had a house in Scottsdale and a condo in Naples, and they talked about both of them constantly, in the way that people do when they need you to know what they have. The first time I met them, at an engagement dinner at a restaurant they had chosen, her father shook my hand and said, "So, you're in trucking?" and then turned to someone else before I had finished answering. I noticed. I said nothing. My son changed after the wedding. It was gradual at first. The way water changes rock, so slowly you can convince yourself nothing is happening. He stopped calling on Sundays. He started using words and phrases I didn't recognize as his. He talked about optics and positioning and what things communicated to people. He started wearing the kind of clothes that had small logos on them that I later learned cost $600. When I asked him how work was going, he was managing a division of a mid-sized manufacturing firm. He would give me answers that sounded like press releases. At Christmas the first year, I drove to their house with a car full of gifts and stayed 3 days in the guest room. Her mother spent most of the visit talking to my son and daughter-in-law about a property her parents were looking at in Portugal. Her father told a story at dinner about a deal he had almost made in the early 2000s that would have been enormous, and everyone at the table nodded as though it had actually happened. No one asked me anything. I was present in the way that furniture is present. Necessary to the room, but not interesting. I drove home on the 27th of December and called my attorney, a woman named Patricia who had handled my business affairs for 18 years. I didn't tell her why I was calling. I just said I wanted to review some things. She said she'd set up a meeting in January. I did not act on anything then. I want to be clear about that. I am not a man who moves on feeling. I observed. I waited. I tried for 2 more years to find a way into the life my son was building. And then came the wedding anniversary party. They had been married 3 years when my daughter-in-law's parents decided to throw a party for them. It was held at a venue her father rented, a converted farmhouse outside of Dublin, Ohio. About 80 guests, catered, an open bar with a man in a vest behind it. There were framed photographs of my son and daughter-in-law arranged on a long table near the entrance, and I noticed, standing there looking at them, that there was not a single photograph that included me. Not from the wedding, not from holidays. 80-some photographs, and I was not in one of them. I sat at a table near the back with some of my son's old college friends who had also been placed, I realized, at a distance from the center of things. We ate and talked, and I drank 1 glass of wine. Her father gave a toast that lasted 11 minutes and mentioned my son by name 4 times and never mentioned me at all. Her mother cried at the appropriate moment. My son looked at his wife the way men look at women when they are hoping the women are pleased with them. I went to find him during the cocktail hour. I found him near the bar with his father-in-law and 2 other men I didn't know. I put my hand on his shoulder and said his name. He turned, and something crossed his face, something quick, something I was not meant to see, and he said, "Dad, hey, you doing okay back there?" Back there, as though I had been seated in coach. "I'm fine," I said. "I just wanted to say hello." His father-in-law looked at me the way he always looked at me. Politely. Completely. The way you look at something you have already assessed and filed away. "Your dad's in freight, right?" he said to my son. Not to me. "Logistics," my son said. "He has a small company." I looked at my son when he said that. He did not look back at me. I drove home that night and sat in my kitchen for a long time. Then I called Patricia and asked her to come to the house on Monday morning. I told her I wanted to talk about the structure of my estate. What happened over the next 3 months I will tell you carefully, because the details matter. Patricia and I had been discussing, in general terms, various arrangements for some time. My estate was more complex than most people would have guessed. The company, at that point, had been approached twice by private equity groups with acquisition interest, and the more recent number on the table was one that, when Patricia said it aloud in my kitchen on that Monday morning, made the room feel briefly different. There were also investments, accumulated over decades, managed quietly. There was real estate not flashy, not visible, but solid. Properties in 3 states, held through LLCs that I had established years ago on Patricia's advice. I told her what I wanted to do. She listened without expression, which is one of the things I have always valued about her. When I finished, she said, "You've thought about this." "I have," I said. "Then let's build it correctly," she said. And we did. Over those 3 months, we restructured everything. A trust was established irrevocable, meaning that once it was signed, it could not be undone regardless of what anyone said or did or promised. The beneficiary of the trust was not my son. It was a foundation, set up in Carol's name, directed toward pediatric cancer research and a scholarship fund at the state university where she had earned her degree. I had thought about this for a long time. I want to be clear about that too. This was not anger. This was clarity. I also made other arrangements. An account, separate, liquid, was set aside, not large by the standards of the rest, but enough. Enough for a fresh start. Enough for a person who might, one day, decide to become someone worth giving it to. I told no one what I had done. I went to my son's house for Thanksgiving as planned. I brought a pie from the diner, because the woman behind the counter made a good pie, and I had been buying it for years. Her mother made a point of mentioning that she had ordered dessert from a French bakery. The pie sat at the end of the table untouched. At dinner, her father mentioned, as though it were casual, that he had been talking to some people about a development project, and that he could use a partner with capital who understood logistics infrastructure. He looked at me when he said it. I said I would think about it. He said there wasn't much time. I said I understood that feeling. After dinner, I helped clear the table, because that is what I have always done. And my son stopped me in the kitchen and said, quietly, that it would mean a lot to him if I would consider getting involved with the Hargroves project. He said it would help him with them. He said family relationships were complicated and that this would smooth things over. I looked at him. He was 41 years old. He had his mother's eyes and his own ambitions. And somewhere inside him was the boy I had driven to baseball games in the dark, who had cried for an entire month after Carol died, and who I had held in the hallway at 2 a.m. more times than I could count. I'll think about it, I said. I did not sleep well that night. In November, exactly 1 year after the engagement party, 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, my son called and invited me to a dinner at the house. Just family, he said. His in-laws were visiting. He said his daughter-in-law wanted everyone together. I drove over on a Friday evening. I brought a bottle of wine I had been saving. A small thing, but good. Her father opened the door and took the bottle from my hands without looking at the label and set it on the counter in the kitchen and said, "We've got plenty, but thanks." I sat in the living room while they finished cooking, and her mother talked about Portugal again, and the condo in Naples, and a fundraiser she was co-chairing in the spring. Dinner was fine. Everyone was polite. The wine they served was from a vineyard her father knew someone at. It was not my wine. After dessert, her father brought up the project again. More direct this time. Numbers. Timelines. What he needed and when. He used the word partner, the way some men use it, not as an equal, but as a function. I am looking for someone to do a specific thing. I am looking for capital and connections, and what you bring to the table is defined and limited. I said I appreciated him sharing the details. He said he needed an answer. I said I wasn't in a position to commit. The table got quiet. My son looked at his plate. My daughter-in-law looked at her father. Her father set down his fork and looked at me in a way that I had not been looked at in many years, as though I had said something not just disappointing but revealing, as though my answer had confirmed something he had suspected about me for a long time. "That's too bad," he said. "I thought you were a businessman." I said, "I am." And then my son looked up. And what he said next, I have gone over it many times, trying to find a version of it that makes it hurt less. And I have not found one. He said, "Dad, no one here is trying to pressure you, but this is important to us, to our future. If you can't help your own family, that says something." His wife nodded. Her mother reached over and touched her son-in-law's hand. Her father picked his fork back up. I sat there for a moment. Then I put my napkin on the table and pushed my chair back and said I thought I should head home. My son said, "Dad, come on." But he didn't stand. He didn't follow me to the door. His father-in-law said something quiet to his daughter and she laughed, softly, and I heard it as I was putting on my coat. I opened the front door myself. It was raining. I had not brought an umbrella. I walked to my truck and I sat in it for a moment in the driveway, watching the rain on the windshield. And I thought about Carol, and about the boy who had cried in the hallway, and about 31 years of early mornings. Then I drove home. I called Patricia from the kitchen that night. It was late. She answered on the second ring, because she always does, because she is that kind of person. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "So we're done deliberating." "We're done," I said. The following Monday, I met with the private equity group that had made the most recent offer on the company. I had put them off twice. I told them I was ready to talk. They were pleased. The process that followed was thorough and detailed and took 11 weeks. And at the end of it, I signed documents in a conference room downtown with Patricia beside me, and a pen that belonged to the firm. It was a Tuesday in February. The rain had turned to something close to snow outside the window. When I walked out of that building, I did not feel the way I thought I would feel. I felt settled. I called my son that evening. He answered and said, "Hey, Dad," in the tone he had been using for 3 years, the tone that was friendly but pointed slightly away from me, like a door that is technically open but positioned to suggest you should knock. I said, "I wanted to let you know I've sold the company." There was a pause. "You sold? Wait, what? When?" "Today," I said. "Signed this afternoon." Another pause. I could hear something shifting in the background. A chair, a voice, his wife probably, somewhere nearby. "How much?" he said. It was the first question. Not are you okay? Not how do you feel? Not what are you going to do now? I told him. The silence that followed was long enough that I counted it. 7 seconds. 8. Dad, he said. His voice had changed. Dad, that's why didn't you tell me? We could have. There are things we've been trying to put together. The project with my father-in-law. If you had told us earlier, we could have. I know, I said. You should have told me, he said. And now there was something else in his voice. Something that was trying to be hurt but was landing closer to entitled. That's family money. That affects all of us. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, I wanted you to know. I also wanted to let you know I'll be doing some traveling in the spring. I may be hard to reach. He said, can we talk about this? Can you come over this weekend? I said I'd see. I did not go that weekend. I went 3 weeks later, because Patricia had asked me to wait until everything was properly recorded, and I had agreed. By then, certain documents had been filed, certain accounts had been arranged, and everything was exactly as I had designed it. I arrived at his house on a Sunday afternoon. His in-laws were there, which I had not expected, and I understood immediately that my son had told them about the sale. Her father greeted me at the door with a warmth he had never extended before. Her mother hugged me. My daughter-in-law brought me coffee without being asked. We sat in the living room, and they talked, all 4 of them, about the project, about what was now possible, about Portugal. Again, but differently now, not as something they had, but as something we might share. Her father talked about me as a man of vision. Her mother talked about how family was everything. My son sat beside his wife and watched me with an expression I can only describe as hope, real hope. The kind that is really want, wearing hope's clothes. I listened to all of it. Then I set down my coffee cup and I said, I want to talk to you about the estate. Her father said, Of course, we don't need to get into it today. I'd like to, I said, because I think there are some misunderstandings about what the sale means for all of you. And I'd rather be clear. The room got quiet in a particular way. The kind of quiet that pays attention. I explained the trust. I explained what irrevocable meant. I explained that the proceeds of the sale, and the investments, and the properties, had been directed to the foundation, to Carol's foundation, and had been so directed for nearly 8 months, well before any of this conversation, well before the dinner in November, well before any of them had known there was anything to position for. I watched my son's face move through several things in quick succession. Confusion. Disbelief. Something that was not quite grief but was adjacent to it. Her father said, That's not, you can undo that. You can restructure. No. Patricia had told me to say, and I said it simply. It's irrevocable. That's what the word means. But why? My son said. And now his voice had broken slightly, and I felt it. I did. Because he was still my son, and he was still in there somewhere beneath everything that had been layered over him. Why would you do that without talking to me? The same reason you sat at the table in November, I said. And let your father-in-law say what he said. And said nothing. Her father started to speak. I looked at him and he stopped. I said, I want to say something to you, son. Not to anyone else in this room. To you. And I waited until he was looking at me. Your mother worked 2 jobs for 3 years while I was building that company. She packed your lunches and helped you with your homework and drove you to practice. And she did it while she was tired, in a way that I don't think you ever saw, because she didn't want you to see it. That company, and everything it became, was built on her years. I have given it to the thing that took her from us, because that's what she would have done. And I am at peace with that. The room was very quiet. There is a separate account, I said. It is enough to matter. It is not enough to coast on. It will be available to you when, and only when, you've lived without it for 1 full year. Patricia has the details. She'll be in touch. I stood up. I picked up my coat from the arm of the chair. Her father said my name. Not the way he had said it before. Differently. I said, Good afternoon. I drove home in the February cold with the heat on and a song on the radio that Carol had liked, one of those songs that belonged to a specific decade and came back to you without warning. I did not cry. I was not angry. I had been angry. Quietly. For long enough. What I felt, driving home, was something closer to what I imagine people feel When they set down something heavy they have been carrying so long, they stop noticing the weight. I have heard from my son 3 times since that Sunday. The first time was a voicemail in which he was controlled and careful and said he wanted to talk. The second was a letter, handwritten, which surprised me, in which he said some things that were true and some things that were not, and some things that I think he was only beginning to understand. The third was 2 weeks ago. He called on a Sunday evening. I answered. He said, "Dad," just that. And then he said, "I'm sorry." And then neither of us said anything for a while. That account is still there, waiting. I am 63 years old. I live in the same house. I drive the same truck. I eat lunch at the same diner. And the woman behind the counter still knows I take my coffee black. Carol's Foundation made its first grant last month to a research team at a children's hospital in Cincinnati. I read the announcement 3 times. My son's voice on the phone that Sunday evening sounded like a door. Not closed, not fully open, but a door that someone, for the first time in a long time, was considering walking back through. I told him to call me next Sunday. He said he would. I said, "I'll be here."